I think one of the main reasons people who are fans of the franchise Resident Evil don't like Grace is because of the fact that Grace has something that the other Resident Evil characters don't have, but she's also lacking what the other Resident Evil characters do have. Grace has self-awareness and social restrictions, something other Resident Evil characters are able to toss out of the window due to their circumstances. We look at Jill Valentine. She's a brutal bad bitch with the hottest female haircut I have ever seen. She can strike bullets, kill an unkillable machine, and prove an egotistical sociopathic alpha male wrong. Then you get Leon, who is absolutely pathetic in Resident Evil 2, but then suddenly becomes Boy Ranger in Resident Evil 4. He becomes a homicidal wreck that just shoots the zombies for fun at this point and gives a shit about the rest. In the final one, of course. Then there's Ada Wong, who is an absolute weapon, poison ivy sitting in between the rose thorns. She is deadly as she is sexy, but again, heartless, lacking empathy, and she has moral superiority. She does think she's better than everyone else. I don't think anybody remembers Resident Evil 5. My point is I wasn't about to waste several hours on a game that Super Bro couldn't even be bothered to play. Resident Evil 6 also flies over the top of my head, so we won't be talking about that. Ethan, in one way or another, is a lot like Grace. He has this weird optimism that takes the place of Grace's social anxiety, meaning he always believes in the most positive of outcomes but always ends up with the worst luck. In my personal opinion, he should have just left Mia forgotten about her entirely. Sorry, my speech is off. Okay. She is the reason his life looks the way it does, and she's the reason he's dead. The same reason their daughter suffers with an identity crisis, and the reason an entire family structure got ripped apart. If any Resident Evil character ever deserved to die, it's Mia. Despite that, we're here for Grace. Number 6, Grace and Emily. The way she reaches out to Emily makes her seem kind of callous when she decides to return to Emily just because she needs her help solving a puzzle. But with the way Grace talks to herself in this cutscene, I want to address something. Do you recall the first time Grace entered the building where her mother was murdered? She kind of whispers to herself. Then, after having her flashback, she states the obvious about something that was hidden behind a painting. Then, when she stands up after being sedated by Victor's grip, she asks herself, "What did he do to me?" Then, again, when she discovers the corpse where she says to herself, "He's dead, or at least infected." Now, take in mind the incident where, as Superhero calls her, the Hag almost snatches Grace before she reaches a room with lights. She shouts at the Hag. You're probably thinking, well, this doesn't matter. Shut up, yes it does. In general, we don't really see any of the other Resident Evil characters do this. Sometimes Ada or Leon will make a comment about something in their playthroughs, but nothing that revolves around processing information the same way Grace does. Ethan doesn't do it at all, which is interesting considering he's a very emotional man. Of course, nothing's wrong with that. I want my future husband to be a very emotional man. But considering this trait in general, it means Grace is organizing her thoughts, trying to process information more slowly while she develops through her journey. Apparently described as a healthy tool in life. This also means that Grace is organized in some way. Not the physical way, but there's no such thing as the perfect character, so I won't hold that against her. I also love how Grace talks to the corpse as if he's still alive when she decides to borrow his ID wristband. Grace hesitates to open the glass chamber, knowing full well that there's a possibility Emily's infected or some kind of danger to her. Because of Grace's PTSD and her intelligence, let's not deny the fact that Grace can think on her feet when she feels like it, she has better survival instincts than most would. Since I can imagine if Claire were in this scene, she'd just immediately jump through the door and embrace Emily without a care in the world. I can't imagine Jill ever approaching a child, but Ada would definitely leave the child to rot in the cell because she'd be too suspicious of Emily. Ada has a lot of red flags, one of them being her dress code. Now, Grace asks Emily why she's in the cage. Yeah, like Emily would know. Because obviously they'd explain to the child everything they're doing to her and why they're doing that to her. Because despite the fact that they're evil scientists, of course they wouldn't want to keep Emily out of the loop. I don't blame Grace for the question. I just hate how stupid it sounds when you have extra time to think it through. So, Grace actually asks Emily for her consent to enter her little glass cage. Emily sounds so confused when she gives Grace permission, because I think in a normal scenario, the adult would just enter without really thinking twice. So after accessing the door and stepping inside, Grace has learned nothing about socializing from the previous cutscenes, mainly because I don't think Grace has ever interacted with a child before, and that's why she's so shocked and hesitant. Now, imagine this scene as a blind child, as a female who can't even form a coherent sentence, and who stutters like a scratched record tells you to come with her, and that she's part of the police. Would you? I guess the main reason Emily would go with Grace is because it's not like anybody else is coming to save this child. The next thing I want to bring up that has nothing to do with Grace, in fact it comes from Emily, the way she phrases, "Why?" I know voice acting for a child is hard, but but Emily sounds sarcastic. Like, no, why? Please tell us. I just realized it took Grace this long just to introduce herself. Regardless, Grace attempts to approach Emily with the question, do you like reading? Then she asks, do you think you could read something for me? I don't know about you guys, but if some random woman asked me to read something for her, I just think it would have been really funny to see Emily start reading to Grace out of her book instead of just reacting the way the game preferred her to react. Grace's approach towards Emily is also really unnatural. The way Grace socializes with Emily is as if Emily's the adult. Emily just has this blank expression with some mannerisms indicating Grace is uncomfortable to be around. Honestly, I don't blame Emily. Emily does decide to go with her, but just use your imagination here and imagine any of the other Resident Evil characters in this scenario. I full-heartedly believe that Grace is the only character in Resident Evil that would ever thank the child for her help. I never realized this until now, but Grace is the only Resident Evil character that delivers compassion and gratitude. Except for Ashley, in the sense of gratitude. She has a lot of gratitude for the fact that her hero is some sexy Boy Scout who looks like he just grew out of puberty. Now back to Grace. Her mannerisms here are expressions of her heartbeat, as you can hear her breath caught every several seconds. This is high blood pressure. In other words, Grace is looking at a stumbling blind child, fully aware of the hordes of zombies that are waiting outside. Suspicions confirmed when Grace reaches the safe room, she's relieved. Grace has a protective nature over Emily with the way she keeps her hands over Emily's shoulders and immediately offers to carry her, which produces a maternal instinct. If you don't know what a maternal instinct is, I don't know, look it up. Which is also why Grace willingly throws herself outside for the wolves in order to protect Emily, a case that is further made evident when Grace jumps in a pitch-black hole to save Emily. This could also be because Grace's social anxiety won't give her the time of day if she has to live with the weight of Emily's death on her shoulders as well. It could go both ways, but I choose to believe that Grace has a special attachment to Emily, one that goes beyond just guilt. Number 7. Grace's capabilities. Obviously, by now it's evident that Grace is a thinker, not a fighter. So she figures out a way to get Emily out of her cage because she's not suicidal enough to climb through a ceiling hole where the hag might be crawling around. Wait, did I? I just realized Emily gets stuck in 2 cages here. This child was just born to be in a cage, I guess. Okay, she takes the long way around where she has to find 3 joint plugs, which look like fuses. In this one, Grace's struggles are not in the cutscenes. This is a lengthy puzzle that requires the player to pull out the fuses from one area to the next in order to enter certain areas, and Grace also has to hide from the hag because she continuously chases Grace around the facility. Her round also has a lot of crafting, as the game kind of just throws around a bunch of blood puddles, which you can have the genius experience of watching, while Super Herbo excitedly encourages this action. I do want to specify, though, how do you use blood to make bullets? According to our dear friend and longtime professor, Google, you can use blood to make bullets, but not as a primary source material. In other words, it would be more for the effect rather than a necessity, but they did mention that Resident Evil introduced the mechanic of using blood to make bullets. In other words, Grace is iconic and Google knows it. Other than that, Grace gets flushed out by blood and leaves the sentence, "It got in my mouth," which I don't know what this virus chemical thing is, but according to what we can gather, open wounds and saliva causes it to infect the individual who comes into contact with it via their mouth or an open wound. If we take a look at Grace and entirely ignore the comment she made, she has this gash across her chest, which has a blood stain over the bandages, so I assume she has an open wound, which is just connected with infected blood. Okay, now, I don't exactly know what kind of virus this is because apparently there are various viruses throughout the Resident Evil franchise, but I don't think they explicitly state which kind of virus these individuals are infected with, because Super Herbo mentioned something kind of interesting about how the newer zombies are different from the original zombies that tend to just be brainless, whereas the ones from the beginning have personality traits. Anyway, Grace ends up saving Emily, almost loses her leg, and then we get a bit of humanity from Emily where she almost ends up crying when asking Grace if she's okay. I don't care what anybody says, I still think Emily's a sociopath, but just because she's a sociopath does not mean she can't care for Grace. In other words, sociopaths need some kind of superficial relationship from the individual they have a relationship with. Nope, superficial benefit, not superficial relationship. Okay, sane sociopaths, those that don't want to kill people, do tend to attempt to mimic the idealism of relationship dynamic, like mothers and daughters. She's also blind, she's also 10 years old, and despite being a sociopath, even sociopaths need guidance in life. She does have some kind of attachment towards Grace because I fear Grace is the only human throughout Emily's entire life that has ever offered her any ounce of empathy. And interesting enough, empathy and sympathy are different from one another because sympathy basically means you feel sorry for the individual who is going through a tough time. Empathy indicates that the individual feels for that person, like they understand and they place themselves in that scenario. They understand the scenario, basically. Number 8, Grace's survival instincts. Of course, Grace on her own struggles to comprehend what survival is, but thanks to her PTSD, she looks mistakenly professional in assassinating zombies. But now that she has Emily, Grace has a second sense of wariness, which is when she bumps into the helicopter guy, who, in my personal opinion, is kind of an asshole. I mean, he cusses at Grace, basically attacks her because of her suspicions, and wouldn't you be suspicious as well in this scenario? Because he himself was suspicious that Grace was infected, even asking her if she's infected. She retorts with no, and then proceeds to berate her for her suspicions. Of course, Super Bro justified him based on the fact that he's stressed. But if this is what a stressed out man sounds like, no wonder there are hundreds of Instagram reels of women encouraging young women such as myself to be sexist. But thankfully, I'm smarter than that. I don't know, I feel sexism is just stupidity. Because men have it as well. So, first of all, from your point of view, you see a scared woman running from a building. She could barely make eye contact with you, due to her antisocial behaviorisms. She has a blind child with her, and she's displaying signs of anxiety, and you know about zombies that are basically attacking her. Okay, ignoring Grace, this man is cussing in front of a child. I don't know why, but him treating Grace the way he does in front of a child just feels evil. Eventually, Grace agrees to go into the building and then gets sent to another basement. Because she has to get into the building to get the keys for the helicopter, which is for her own benefit as well, and Emily's as well. But regardless, she reaches a lab, a secret lab, of course, and then almost walks right in front of Gideon after retrieving the keys. Luckily, she ducks before he can see her, and this cutscene feels incredibly unnecessary if it weren't for the fact that the lab was about to blow up. Okay, for a second time, Grace gets washed out by blood. Okay, so she gets back to the airplane. It doesn't last long when Grace makes it back to the helicopter, and it crashes. I love how Grace's voice actress has this crack in her voice whenever Grace screams. It's like a puberty crack. I really hope I don't have it, because then I sound inexperienced. So they crash, and Grace charges towards these doors. I don't know why she chooses to take a dying Emily to a basement. I get she was trying to find shelter or something, but for a child to die in a basement, not only that, but the child basically dies alone. The reason Emily's surviving makes no sense is this simple factor that Resident Evil itself made a common subject, was when an infected individual dies, they morph into a boss-type enemy. Take Resident Evil 4, where Leon kills the priest, another priest, I don't know why there are two priests, when he kills a corpse in general, because they turn into those weird tongue things that start swinging teeth? What is that? Okay, there's Resident Evil 7 where Ethan has to kill the father at least 3 times. I will let one thing pass. When he came back from the dead, they chose to cure him because he wouldn't die and somehow he lives. Which, okay guys, if you take that into account, then Emily's surviving does make sense. Because no matter how many times they shot that other hag, she wouldn't die. It took Grace up until this point to kill her using the sun. Which means Emily not dying makes sense? Thanks to Resident Evil 7's logic? Do they have the same virus? This means they have to keep Victor. If Victor's dead, Resident Evil makes no sense, unless he has a different virus. There's so many different viruses here. Okay, despite this fact, Grace chooses to kill the hag due to Emily's injuries, and this part is kind of maternal anger. I feel personally, because Grace is not an angry person, even with PTSD. The ability to do anything and almost everything to protect the child does come from maternity, okay? Number 9, Grace's... my goodness. Okay, number 9, Grace's purpose in Resident Evil 9. Okay, now we're skipping a bunch of scenes because I don't really feel like they do any favors for a video like this. So skipping ahead to where Grace is stuck with Zeno, staring at a laptop, and he basically tells her she knows a password that she does end up knowing, but I'm gonna be honest, if this were me, if I were Grace, I probably would have put my own name instead of the word hope, because they kept emphasizing on the fact that Grace is special. They used the word hope like twice. Why didn't they just name Grace Hope then? I don't know. It's as if Grace just knew. This has nothing to do with intelligence. His password is literally a 4-letter word. My email password would never let me get away with a 4-letter word. My Instagram password wouldn't even let me get away with just words, even if the word had 10 letters in it. Grace is the luckiest little shit to have ever been born. I mean, no numbers, letters, little emojis, I don't know, those little quote thingies, the at. I don't want to get too much into Resident Evil's story in general, but this timeline makes no sense. So this Megamind man who created this umbrella virus thingy felt guilty when Grace was a baby. Now, if the lab attempted to duplicate Grace, that means the exact same orphanage where What's-Her-Face escaped the exact same orphanage. But if the place got nuked, a bomb that wipes out any possibility of life on that land, then the evil dude who was the Megamind behind all of this retired after Resident Evil 1. Because this means Cheryl and Grace are the same age. For that to take place in the same timeline, then that means everybody from the previous games is mega old. Ashley, Ada, Claire, Chris, Ethan. But, Ethan's dead. This huge timeline jump that they did with Rose screwed the entire Resident Evil franchise over. Rose should have never existed. Her being a baby was fine, but now Resident Evil makes no sense, and I think it's because of the DLC. If the DLC just never existed, then Leon wouldn't look like a wilderness wolfman grandpa. He's so old that he's not even blonde anymore. He's not even gray. What is he? Anyway, so it turns out that Grace's purpose is to know the password so she can cure Leon. Something I find interesting about this cutscene is the way Grace patiently waits for Leon to wake up, whereas this scene could be directly accompanied to the same scene where Ada abandoned Leon in Resident Evil 2. I don't know about you, but if a man was dying right beside me, I'd try and make sure that he was still alive. She leaves him on the floor where there are a bunch of zombies crawling around. I don't know about you, but if she cared about him, don't you think she would have... I don't know, actually, Ada has no attachment to Leon, so I don't know why I expected any better from her. Grace diligently waits as she fears she may not be able to leave. Leon's cancer starts spreading to the point where Grace even notices it. And the way Leon treats Grace versus the way Grace treats Leon is miles different. Leon basically swats her away like a bug, treats her like a child, couldn't care less about her existence if she wasn't the key to releasing whatever Elpis is. I don't even know why they call it Elpis. Does anybody else know? My point being, Leon doesn't care about Grace, and the only reason he doesn't treat her like shit at the end is because she released a cure that saved his life as well. Leon is such a selfish piece of shit throughout this entire game. Grace gets the worst version of Leon. Ashley received the trained version of Leon, and Ada received, the virgin version. At the end of the game, or, at the end of the day, Grace released hope to the world. Not Grace, guys. Hope. Because who would want to release Grace to the world? Because that's her name, and how she associated that word with her name twice is as good a guess as pouring a bottle of healing liquid over your severed wrist. But then again, Ethan made it happen, so... Number 10, the conclusion of Grace Ashcroft. I feel like she's considered a mistake in the horror game community since there's no direct praise for her character throughout Super Bro's entire playthrough. No, because he saves all his praises for the sagged-out sack of selfish meat Leon. Grace barely receives any deserved praise. She's constantly pointed out for having a shaky voice and being incredibly anxious, despite having proved herself by solving puzzles, killing zombies in between, and guiding a blind child through a facility. Grace is a compassionate, empathetic, and intelligent young woman. Her social anxiety mixed with PTSD creates a type of bubble that prevents her from meeting her demise. She's protected Emily throughout this game even after Leon shot the child about a dozen times. She ran over to the mutated corpse and embraced it, which, as a random thing I keep mentioning, Super Bro expressed disgust, of course. Super Bro's reactions matter so much, guys. Without him, what would life be? Of course, we exist for a purpose. But anyway, but as always, the ending is never the ending, and they have to make a doorway that's going to lead them into making more profit on a franchise that should have died down a decade ago. Okay, I just wanted to end this off by stating I am very, bothered. While doing this detailed exploration of Grace's character, I realized that nobody really cares about Grace until Victor shows up. Victor and her boss in the beginning, and that police officer that was also in the beginning, are the only ones that really offer Grace a second opportunity of an explanation, I guess. They care about her in the sense they don't want to confront her, which is something I notice about Mike's playthrough. After Grace tells the officer that there might be answers inside, the officer lets Grace pass with her reply, noticing that she's an uncomfortable female. Mike, however, you're not being very professional. I know not everyone should bend over backwards just to accompany someone who doesn't know how to socialize, but it feels like everyone's just picking on Grace for being the person that she is. So, I guess I don't know, kind of disappointed by the way that he worded Grace's character. But, regardless, Grace's character was well written, even better animated, even more so adapted with her voice actress, and her character design in general looks cool. An almost white t-shirt with a blonde bob, no bangs, and a pair of black jeans that don't sit skin tight around her legs, as well as with the boots that Grace is wearing. I love the style of choice they went with for the first playthrough, and I think the game is well implemented with the intention that you have to finish the original game before you get to unlock the special outfits. And by the way, Grace as Lady D, gorgeous, beautiful, absolutely stunning. They made her ass a little too big on that one, but, you can't ask someone to be perfect. I think it would have been cool if they gave Grace an Ashley Graham outfit, because Ashley is my second favorite Resident Evil female character, but of course, a game franchise shouldn't bend over backwards for a teenager with emotional identity issues or whatever. Okay, with that, we come to the end, and you can congratulate me or berate me on doing a good or bad job, and then we can come back a year or so later and talk about Ashley. Thus forward, I'll see you next week, hopefully, if I'm not dead.